The night everything burned, the fire didn't hurt the most. The smile did. Before I tell you why, let me ask you this. Have you ever watched someone enjoy your pain? Not pretend to care. Not freeze in shock. Actually enjoy it. Because that moment changes something inside you.
Permanently.
My name is Elena Moore. I'm 28 years old. I work as a freelance interior visualizer, and until last year, I lived quietly in a rented townhouse on the edge of Phoenix, Arizona. Nothing fancy. Neutral walls. IKEA couch. A life I built myself after leaving a family that only loved me when I was useful. The fire started at 2:17 a.m. I remember that number because it was blinking on the microwave clock as smoke crawled along the ceiling like it had intent. I remember the sound of the alarm. Sharp. Screaming. I remember grabbing my phone, my laptop, and nothing else. I remember standing outside barefoot on gravel, wrapped in an old hoodie, watching orange light eat the place where I paid rent, cried quietly, and planned a future no one believed I deserved. And then my family arrived. Not running. Not panicked.
Arrived.
Like they were late to something entertaining.
My mother stepped out of the car first.
Hair done. Lipstick perfect. She looked at the flames, then at me, and smiled. Not wide. Not cruel in an obvious way. Just satisfied. The kind of smile people wear when life finally proves them right. She laughed. A soft laugh. Almost proud. My stepfather crossed his arms and said, "This is what happens when you think you're better than everyone else." No one asked if I was hurt. No one asked where I'd sleep. No one offered a jacket. Instead, my younger sister pulled out her phone, started recording. The fire trucks. The sirens.
Me shaking.
She whispered something about content and crazy lighting. I stood there realizing something colder than the night air. They weren't surprised. They'd been waiting for this. Hold on, before we get into the real stuff, I want to know, what are you doing at this exact moment while hearing my voice?
Sitting alone?
Commuting? Lying awake? Drop it in the comments. I read more than you think. Because this story isn't about a fire. It's about what came before it. Growing up, I was the difficult one. The one who asked questions. The one who didn't follow the script. My mom loved image. Church photos. Matching outfits. Success she could point at. I didn't fit. I moved out at 19. Paid my own bills. Learned silence. Learned distance. And they hated that. That night, as my house collapsed inward, my mom leaned close enough for only me to hear and said, "See, you always self-destruct. You should have stayed loyal."
Loyal.
To people who celebrated my loss. Here's the part no one knew. The fire wasn't my fault. And it wasn't random. 3 weeks earlier, I'd refused to sign something. A document involving my late grandmother's property. I was the last signature they needed. I said no. I wanted time. I wanted answers. That night, as the smoke thickened, my phone buzzed. One message. From an unknown number. Consequences arrive hot. I didn't show anyone. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I watched my family take photos. And that's when I made a decision that would quietly dismantle their world one piece at a time. They thought I was finished. But what actually burned that night was my need to be forgiven.
I didn't sleep that night.
Or the next. Shock kept me upright, but anger kept me awake. By sunrise, the fire investigators were already calling it electrical.
Clean.
Accidental. Convenient. My family accepted that explanation immediately, like it absolved them of something they didn't want named. They went home, showered, posted vague captions about hard lessons, and waited for me to crawl back. I didn't. I stayed on a friend's couch for 3 days, wearing borrowed clothes, replaying everything. The laugh. The camera. The message. Every memory felt sharper now, like I'd finally adjusted the focus. I remembered how my mom always needed an audience. How disasters made her feel important. How punishment, in her mind, equaled love. On the 4th day, an insurance adjuster called.
Calm voice.
Apologetic tone. Then the sentence that made my stomach drop. There was evidence of accelerant near the breaker panel. Suddenly, the fire wasn't just a tragedy. It was a question. They reopened the case quietly. No sirens, no announcements, just forms, interviews, and careful wording. When they asked if anyone might benefit from the loss, I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was obvious. I didn't accuse anyone. Not yet. I gave them the document I'd refused to sign weeks earlier. I explained the inheritance, the pressure, the threats disguised as concern. The investigator didn't react, but his pen slowed. That was enough. Meanwhile, my family's tone shifted. Concern replaced mockery. My mom called, voice syrupy, saying she'd had a bad feeling that night. My sister texted heart emojis. My stepfather offered advice about starting over. I said nothing. Silence became my weapon. Here's what people don't tell you about revenge stories. The strongest ones don't start loud. They start invisible. While they were watching me, waiting for collapse, I was watching patterns. Emails, money trails, old arguments that suddenly made sense. I found the LLC my stepfather used to hide assets. I found the loan my mom co-signed using my grandmother's property as leverage. I found the clause that required unanimous heir consent. My consent. They needed me erased. Financially, legally, conveniently. So, I disappeared. I changed my number, locked my social media, took a short-term contract 2 states away under a variation of my name. No dramatic goodbye. No announcement. Just absence. And absence did something unexpected. It panicked them.
Calls turned frantic.
Messages stacked up. My mom left a voicemail crying, saying family was all that mattered. The same woman who smiled at my burning house. The same woman who told me I was cursed. That's when I realized the truth. They weren't afraid for me. They were afraid of what I knew. A month later, the investigator called again. He didn't say much, just asked where I was staying and whether I felt safe. That was the first time I smiled since the fire, because something had shifted. Pressure makes people careless. My sister posted a photo from inside my grandmother's old house. Renovations had started. Too early. Before probate cleared. Before signatures finalized. I screenshot everything. Time slowed. Then tightened. I wasn't planning revenge.
Not in the movie sense.
I wasn't angry enough for that anymore. I was precise. And precision, I would learn, is terrifying to people who built their power on intimidation. They thought the fire ended me. What they didn't understand was that it freed me. And the next move wouldn't come from rage. It would come from patience. But patience doesn't mean mercy. It means letting people walk themselves into rooms with no exits. I began documenting everything with timestamps, backups, and quiet witnesses. I spoke to an attorney under confidentiality, learning which truths mattered and which ones simply felt good to say. I learned how quickly confidence crumbles when it isn't reinforced by control. Every unanswered message fed their anxiety. Every delay stretched their lies thinner. I stayed invisible on purpose, because invisibility is where leverage grows. Somewhere between motel rooms and borrowed desks, I stopped flinching when my phone rang. I stopped needing apologies. I stopped imagining reconciliation scenes that would never happen. Instead, I imagined doors closing one by one, not slammed, just gently shut. The kind that lock automatically behind you. And I waited because waiting was no longer passive. It was active. It was deliberate. And it was already working. Soon, their certainty would fracture publicly, and my silence would become the loudest evidence they'd ever underestimated, especially when consequences finally demanded names and dates alone. By the month after the fire, cracks started forming in their confidence, because silence invites imagination, and imagination terrifies people who survive by controlling narratives. My mother began calling relatives, asking questions that sounded casual, but carried panic, trying to locate me without admitting she feared what my absence meant. My sister deleted old posts, scrubbed captions, archived videos, because once you realize evidence exists, every memory becomes potentially dangerous to protect for everyone involved. Meanwhile, I watched quietly, documenting everything, understanding that power shifts fastest when the loudest people suddenly realize they are not alone anymore in this situation. The investigator finally asked for an in-person meeting, which told me enough, because investigations only accelerate when conclusions start becoming uncomfortable for certain parties. We met in a neutral office, beige walls, cold lights, where he explained inconsistencies that no accident could honestly account for without deliberate outside involvement. Someone had accessed the breaker panel intentionally, used accelerant strategically, and left minimal traces, assuming the fire would erase everything else, including family-related motives. I didn't react because my reaction wasn't needed anymore, because facts speak louder when emotions stop interrupting their delivery during sensitive legal investigative procedural moments. He warned me quietly that things could escalate quickly and asked whether I wanted protection once formal notices were issued to involved family members officially. That was the moment I understood how close they were to unraveling everything they'd built on intimidation and secrecy for decades without accountability or resistance. Back home, my mother hosted a dinner party, posting smiling photos, desperate to prove stability before the ground shifted beneath her carefully curated public persona. What she didn't know was that banks were flagging irregularities connected to the property loan she assumed invisible for years without scrutiny or recorded objections. My stepfather grew aggressive in messages, threatening lawyers, demanding cooperation, because bullies panic when authority stops responding to intimidation after years of unquestioned compliance everywhere. Every threat he sent became evidence, neatly archived, time-stamped, strengthening a case he assumed didn't exist beyond his controlled family ecosystem and influence bubble. I moved again, intentionally, because distance creates safety, and safety allows clarity when storms begin breaking against long-standing emotional manipulation patterns ingrained deeply within. The official letters went out quietly, requesting documents, explanations, timelines, and cooperation that could no longer be postponed by anyone involved in questionable property transfers. My family called nonstop that night, confusion replacing confidence, because consequences feel unreal until they arrive personally at your doorstep, demanding accountability and transparency publicly. I let every call ring because silence now wasn't avoidance. It was proof I finally held leverage over people who once dictated every outcome in life. Revenge doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers so softly people walk forward willingly into collapse without realizing the ground beneath them already disappeared completely forever. And the next phase would expose them publicly, not through fire, but through documents they signed themselves, believing loyalty would always protect them from truth. Because paperwork never laughs, never lies, and never protects anyone when dates and signatures align against personal relationships, emotional manipulation, or manufactured narratives anymore ever. I knew then this story would end differently than it began, without flames, but with consequences that could not be reversed, apologized away, or denied. The calm before exposure felt surreal, like standing still while dominoes leaned, waiting for gravity to finish what years of manipulation had quietly arranged already. They thought the fire was my ending, but it was simply the beginning of their accountability for choices hidden behind family loyalty, fear, and control. Everything was in motion now, and nothing they said could stop what was finally documented within legal systems designed specifically to dismantle abuse and fraud. I wasn't celebrating yet, because justice isn't satisfying until truth becomes undeniable to everyone watching, including those who once cheered your destruction publicly without shame. Soon, they would understand how powerless laughter becomes when facts take center stage inside courtrooms, financial institutions, and records that never forget names or dates. I stayed quiet, steady, prepared, because survival had finally transformed into strategy built from patience, documentation, and refusing to rescue people from consequences they earned. The revenge was already happening, whether they acknowledged it or not, because systems don't require permission from abusers to function effectively once evidence appears clearly. And next, the first public crack would finally appear, impossible to hide behind curated smiles, staged dinners, or performative family unity ever again publicly anywhere. The first real crack showed up on a Tuesday morning, disguised as a casual phone call that my mother never expected to receive. Her bank froze the account tied to my grandmother's property, citing pending verification, which is corporate language for suspicion that refuses to be ignored. She panicked publicly, calling relatives, claiming technical errors, blaming incompetent employees, because panic always looks like outrage when entitlement feels threatened. By noon, my sister's renovation photos disappeared completely, replaced by inspirational quotes about patience, faith, and trusting timing during difficult seasons. That told me everything I needed to know because people don't erase proof unless they finally understand it can be used against them legally. The investigator contacted me again, informing me that subpoenas were being prepared for financial institutions connected to the loan documentation I had quietly provided earlier. He didn't sound excited, just thorough, because professionals rarely celebrate until consequences are unavoidable and systems have already locked doors behind guilty parties. I asked one question calmly. Will they know it was me? And he paused before answering honestly. Eventually, yes. That answer didn't scare me, because fear had already burned away months earlier along with everything I thought I needed from them emotionally. When my mother finally reached me through an unfamiliar number, her voice shook, switching rapidly between concern, accusation, nostalgia, and thinly veiled desperation. She said families fight, mistakes happen, forgiveness heals, and I almost laughed at the irony of her suddenly discovering compassion when money felt endangered. I told her nothing because explanations are gifts, and I was done handing out gifts to people who celebrated my destruction. 2 days later, official notices arrived at their house, requesting appearances, records, and sworn statements that could no longer be avoided or postponed strategically. My stepfather responded predictably, hiring an aggressive attorney who specialized in intimidation, delay tactics, and exhausting opponents into silence through pressure. Unfortunately for him, pressure only works on people who fear losing approval, and I had already lost everything approval ever bought me. The attorney contacted mine, suggesting mediation, cooperation, and family-friendly resolutions, which translated clearly into damage control before public exposure. I declined mediation, politely, firmly, because mediation protects reputations, not truth, and I wasn't interested in protecting theirs anymore. Behind closed doors, tension exploded, neighbors overheard shouting, relatives chose sides, and the image my mother curated for decades began cracking visibly. She stopped posting entirely because silence online feels louder than scandal when someone built identity entirely around public validation. The investigation uncovered additional irregularities, including forged initials, altered dates, and improperly notarized documents connected to multiple assets. That discovery escalated everything quickly, triggering audits beyond the original property dispute and widening the circle of accountability dramatically overnight. My sister attempted contact again, crying this time, apologizing vaguely without naming wrongdoing, asking me to make it stop. I told her the truth gently. I can't stop something I didn't start, and hung up before she could respond. That was the hardest call, because grief doesn't disappear just because justice approaches, it just changes shape into something quieter. As proceedings advanced, whispers spread through extended family networks, replacing admiration with suspicion, curiosity, and uncomfortable questions nobody could answer anymore. My mother's favorite thing, certainty, vanished completely, leaving her grasping for narratives that no longer convinced even herself. Every update tightened the timeline, narrowing excuses, forcing explanations that contradicted each other publicly and privately under recorded scrutiny. For the first time, they weren't controlling the story, and watching that terrified confidence dissolve felt strangely calm, not triumphant. Revenge stories promise satisfaction, but what they rarely mention is the stillness that comes when power finally balances itself naturally. I wasn't cheering, because accountability isn't entertainment. It's closure unfolding slowly through procedures and consequences nobody escapes gracefully. The fire destroyed my house, but this process dismantled their illusion of untouchability piece by piece without flames or spectacle. Soon, everything would become official, undeniable, recorded permanently, and that permanence frightened them more than any confrontation ever could. Because records don't forget, systems don't care about tears, and truth doesn't negotiate once it reaches the surface. The The final phase was approaching, and this time, everyone would be watching, not laughing, not filming, just witnessing accountability arrive quietly. The courtroom wasn't dramatic the way movies sell it. No shouting, no gasps, just quiet authority and a weight that settled into everyone's chest the moment proceedings began. I sat in the back row, intentionally out of sight, watching my mother scan the room repeatedly, searching for control and finding none. My stepfather sat stiff, jaw clenched, confidence leaking out in small, involuntary gestures. My sister looked smaller than I remembered, curled inward, finally realizing that proximity to power doesn't protect you when truth arrives formally. The judge didn't care about family dynamics. That's what terrified them most. Document after document was entered into record.
Signatures compared.
Dates cross-referenced. Transfers traced. Each piece alone looked harmless. Together, they formed a map of intent. My name came up often, not as an accused, as a withheld variable. The investigator testified calmly, outlining how refusal to sign delayed transfers, how pressure escalated afterward, how motive aligned cleanly with timing. The accelerant evidence was mentioned carefully, not as an accusation yet, but as context. Context is dangerous. Context invites questions. My mother finally looked at me then, really looked, not with anger, not with superiority, with fear. That look was new. Her attorney objected frequently, but objections lose power when facts remain unchanged. My stepfather's lawyer tried to redirect blame toward misunderstandings, clerical errors, family miscommunication. But systems don't misunderstand patterns. When the fire was mentioned, my chest tightened, not from grief, from memory, from the sound of her laugh echoing in my head, while smoke rose behind us. They asked if I wanted to testify. I stood, not to accuse, not to cry, just to clarify. I stated my name, my age, my profession. I explained my refusal to sign. I described the pressure. I mentioned the message I received the night of the fire. I did not speculate. I did not dramatize. I told the truth. And truth has a way of landing harder when it isn't decorated. The room felt different afterward. Heavier. Final. A recess was called. During it, my mother approached me for the first time since the fire. No cameras. No audience. No performance. She whispered, "You didn't have to destroy us." I answered quietly, "You destroyed yourselves. I just stopped protecting you." That was the moment something broke in her expression. Not guilt.
Loss.
Because for the first time, she understood she no longer had access to me. Not emotionally. Not legally. Not narratively. When court resumed, the judge ordered expanded investigation into the fire itself. Formal. Official. Unavoidable. My stepfather's hand shook. My sister cried openly. My mother stared forward, frozen. This wasn't the end, but it was the point of no return. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Questions flew. Cameras clicked. I walked past them without stopping. Because revenge doesn't require applause. It requires completion. Over the following weeks, consequences unfolded methodically. Accounts seized. Properties locked. Charges discussed. Reputations questioned. Family friends stopped calling. Church invitations disappeared. The image collapsed faster than I expected once truth removed its foundation. I relocated again, this time by choice, not necessity. I signed a lease under my real name. I bought furniture intentionally. I slept deeply for the first time in a year. One night, scrolling idly, I saw an old video resurface. The fire. My sister filming. My mother laughing faintly in the background. The comments were different now. Questions. Criticism. Recognition. People finally saw what I had always lived. I closed the app and turned off my phone. Because the loudest moment of revenge isn't exposure. It's peace. And peace, once earned, doesn't burn. After the courtroom phase ended, life didn't suddenly become cinematic or victorious. It became quiet in a way I had never experienced before. Quiet mornings. Quiet evenings. Quiet thoughts that didn't orbit fear, anticipation, or survival anymore. That silence felt unfamiliar at first, like standing in a room after loud machinery shuts off and your ears keep ringing anyway. I kept expecting another crisis, another call, another threat wrapped in concern, but nothing came. When control finally disappears, people rarely know what to do next. My mother retreated completely from public view. Friends whispered. Relatives distanced themselves. The community she once curated like a stage no longer applauded or protected her narrative. My stepfather's legal strategy shifted from aggression to damage limitation. He stopped pretending innocence and started negotiating outcomes quietly, hoping to contain fallout before it consumed everything else connected to his name. That alone confirmed everything I needed to know. The fire investigation advanced faster now. Without property influence shielding them, timelines aligned clearly. Phone pings, vehicle movement, purchase records. The accelerant had been bought using a card linked to one of their accounts. Not directly, indirectly, but enough. When investigators informed me of this update, I felt nothing dramatic. No joy, no rage, just confirmation. Confirmation closes doors emotionally. People assume revenge is about watching someone suffer, but real revenge is watching truth stand alone without your involvement anymore. Once systems take over, you're no longer the driver, just the witness. My sister reached out again, this time with clarity. She admitted she knew about the pressure. She admitted she filmed because she was told to. She admitted fear kept her compliant. I believed her, and I still didn't intervene. Because understanding someone's pain doesn't obligate you to absorb it. That was a lesson I learned too late, but learned fully. As months passed, outcomes solidified.
Fines, settlements,
Restrictions, names permanently flagged. Not cinematic destruction, but something worse for people like them. Permanent accountability. The fire charges never fully went to trial. A plea resolved it quietly. No press conference. No spectacle. Just paperwork stating responsibility. That mattered more than headlines ever could. I rebuilt slowly. Not just furniture or finances, but identity. Without rebellion. Without reaction. I stopped defining myself as the one who escaped or survived. I became the one who chose differently. Therapy helped. Distance helped. Forgiveness did not come quickly, and I stopped forcing it. Healing isn't forgiving what happened. It's accepting that it happened without letting it shape your future decisions. One afternoon, almost a year after the fire, I drove past my old neighborhood intentionally. The townhouse had been rebuilt. Different paint, different door. No memory inside those walls belonged to me anymore. I didn't stop. I didn't cry. I kept driving. Later that night, I received a final message from my mother. No apology. No accusation. Just, I hope you're happy. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it without replying. Because happiness doesn't need witnesses or permission from people who tried to erase you. The truth is, I didn't win because they lost. I won because I stopped participating. Revenge isn't always retaliation. Sometimes it's refusal. Refusal to be small. Refusal to explain. Refusal to return. And what they lost when I walked away quietly was something they could never replace. Control. They laughed when my house burned. Now they live in the silence I built without them. The strange thing about freedom is that it doesn't announce itself when it arrives. It settles in slowly, disguised as routine, until one day you realize you're breathing without checking who might take the air away. A year after the fire, my life looked unremarkable from the outside, and that was exactly the victory. I worked steady contracts, redesigned small commercial spaces, drank coffee on my balcony without flinching at sirens or raised voices. No one monitored my choices anymore. No one corrected my tone. No one rewrote my story behind my back. Meanwhile, consequences continued unfolding quietly for them. My stepfather lost professional credibility after financial reviews flagged him as high risk. Opportunities dried up. Invitations stopped. He wasn't publicly disgraced, but he was effectively sidelined, which hurt him far more. My mother attempted a comeback. A new social media account, vague posts about resilience, quotes about motherhood and sacrifice. They received polite likes, nothing more. People remember patterns, even when scandals fade. The extended family stopped treating me like a problem that needed fixing. Some reached out cautiously, unsure whether they were allowed to acknowledge what had happened. I kept boundaries firm, but humane. Boundaries confused people who relied on access as power. One afternoon, I received a forwarded message from a cousin. A video clip,
Old.
edited. My mother explaining how some children choose destruction over loyalty. The comments weren't sympathetic anymore. They were questioning. That's when I understood something important. Reputation doesn't collapse when accusations surface. It collapses when people stop defending you instinctively. I didn't share the clip. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't need to. Silence had done enough damage already. In therapy, my counselor asked a question that caught me off guard. If you ran into your mother today, what would you want her to understand? The answer came immediately. Nothing. Because needing someone to understand you is still giving them power over your peace. That realization marked the final shift. I stopped rehearsing imaginary confrontations. Stopped crafting explanations I'd never deliver. Stopped checking updates connected to their names. The story no longer required my attention to continue resolving itself. On the anniversary of the fire, I did something symbolic. I donated the insurance settlement I eventually received to a housing assistance nonprofit in another city. I didn't announce it. I didn't attach my name. I wanted the loss to transform into something useful without becoming another chapter of my identity. That night, I slept better than I had in years. People assume revenge needs a grand reveal, a moment where everyone finally admits you were right. But closure isn't consensus. It's detachment. The fire took my house. The investigation took their power. But walking away took my fear. And fear was the last thing connecting me to them. I learned something essential through all of this. Family isn't who shares your blood. It's who doesn't celebrate your destruction. And loyalty that demands silence isn't loyalty at all. It's ownership. The most satisfying part of this story isn't what happened to them. It's what stopped happening to me. No more shrinking. No more anticipating punishment for independence. No more explaining why I deserved basic dignity. I didn't rebuild to prove them wrong. I rebuilt because I deserved a life where fire wasn't followed by laughter. And in the end, that life existed quietly, fully, without their names attached anywhere inside it. But one final truth remained unspoken. The thing they lost that year wasn't money, status, or control. It was access to the person they tried to destroy. And that loss? That one was permanent. The final lesson didn't arrive with a verdict, a headline, or an apology. It arrived quietly, on an ordinary morning, when I realized I hadn't thought about them in weeks. No anger, no curiosity, no urge to check, just absence. That was the real ending. Revenge stories usually end with someone broken, exposed, humiliated in public. But that kind of ending still centers the people who caused the damage in the first place. This ending centered me. I had rebuilt a life that didn't flinch, a life that didn't need permission, a life that didn't explain itself. My career stabilized in ways I never imagined before the fire. Clients trusted me. Colleagues respected my boundaries. I chose projects because they aligned with my values, not because I was desperate to prove worth. And most importantly, I stopped mistaking endurance for strength. Real strength was choosing peace without guilt. Every once in a while, someone would mention my mother in passing. A rumor, a vague update, a tone that suggested pity mixed with discomfort. I never asked questions, because closure isn't knowing how someone else feels. It's knowing you're done carrying it. I used to believe survival meant outlasting pain. Now I understand survival means outgrowing the environment that caused it. The fire didn't define me. Their laughter didn't define me. Even the investigation didn't define me. What defined me was the moment I stopped trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding me. If you're listening to this and you're still inside something that feels like obligation disguised as love, hear this clearly. Love doesn't require silence. Family doesn't demand self-destruction. And loyalty never celebrates your pain. Walking away doesn't make you cruel. It makes you free. My story didn't end with them begging. It didn't end with reconciliation. It ended with distance, stability, and a future that didn't feel like a battlefield. And that ending was earned. I sometimes think back to the night of the fire, to the way the flames reflected in my mother's eyes as she smiled. She thought that moment proved I was weak, disposable, replaceable. What she didn't understand was that fire only destroys what's trapped. Everything else escapes. Today, I live in a space that feels safe. Not because nothing bad could happen, but because I know I can survive without becoming bitter, small, or dependent again. That's the kind of revenge no one can take from you. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been the scapegoat, the afterthought, the one expected to absorb pain quietly, you're not alone. And you're not wrong for wanting more. Before you go, take a second to support the channel. Like this video if it hits somewhere personal. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And subscribe to Silent Revenge Lab for more stories where power shifts quietly and accountability arrives without permission. Because sometimes the loudest revenge is living well without them.